Well, good morning, and I bring greetings from the team in Mexico. I was down there this week having a blast, and my finger met a hammer. So that's what happens when Sean tries to do handy things. But no, it was a great trip. In fact, they're going to be back, and we'll have a short report next week. And then a few weeks after that, when more of the team is available, we'll have an extended report. But it was a rich time. My son and I were on the trip, and we got to experience this great tradition of Saratoga Federated Church. And it was really, I've been on a lot of these trips. I think this was my 9th one to Mexico and have led some of them. And this was all around, I think, the healthiest trip that I've been on. I was really proud of our leaders. There were very few egos. There was none of this, like, get out of the way, little kids, let the adults do it. The kids were involved. The people that didn't know what they were doing, me, got to get involved and hurt themselves and all sorts of stuff. So it was just a blast. So look forward to that. But it was a rich time. Hey, I want you to grab this because there's this perforated welcome card, and this series is going to be a little bit different. We're going to be taking questions, and on here there's a spot for you to write questions. So this is how this is going to work. You can write your name. You don't have to write your name. Whatever you want to do, write the question, and if you can, on the way out, there's a basket over on the side. Wave your hand, Jim, right there. Put that in the basket. We're going to be collecting these, and we're going to be kind of consolidating these questions according to topic, kind of look at what are the most asked questions, and we may be answering some of these along the way. But at the very end of this series, there's going to be another panel, which I know that you've enjoyed, and we're going to be reflecting on this series and really wrestling with some of these questions. We're also looking at, I'm not sure when this will happen, but we're looking at bringing back our podcast, the B-side. We'll also be wrestling with some of your questions. And so feel free to ask those along the way in this journey. But I'm really excited about this series, Deconstruction When Faith Falls Apart. And it's more normal than you would think, and we'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to start by just showing you a picture that you might recognize. Anybody see this before? Yeah. This was painted in 1940. It's the most reproduced image of Jesus ever, at least in the 20th century. But there's 500 million reproductions of this painting right here. 500 million. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to make some observations about this photo, if you will. What do you notice? He's white, very Western European, even American. Yeah, exactly. He's very white. He's got long, fine hair. I mean, we could even turn it into a mullet if we wanted to. Like, I don't know if you noticed that before, but this picture was everywhere. They had it in card size. You could carry it in your wallet. They had it in a big painting size. Lots of people had it in their homes. Churches had it on their walls. It was just everywhere. Now, I grew up in the 1970s. I had a different picture of Jesus on my wall. He looked like this. Also very, 1970s American, kind of cool, hip, very good-looking Jesus, if I might say so myself. But this is kind of what I grew up with. And so when I prayed and when I thought about Jesus, I had certain images in my mind. Now, I'm going to show you another one. Don't put it up yet, Will, but I'm going to show you another one in a second. I'll tell you when to put it up. But in 2004, I think, or in the early 2000s, there was a group of forensic scientists that got together with some forensic artists, and they got together with some archaeologists from Israel. And they took some skulls that were actually dated from the time of Jesus right in that area. And they reproduced, also using some of the literature of the time and that sort of thing. And what would an average Israelite man look like at that time? And this is the picture they came up with, this computer-generated photo. So go ahead and put that next one up. And so, do you notice any difference? Yeah. And so the way that they explain this is you have obviously a darker complexion, different shape of the face. The average male at that time would have been about 5'6". So most of the Jesuses that you see are very tall, but very short. The hair was curlier and more coarse. And so I never had this in mind when I was growing up and praying and thinking about Jesus and reading the Bible and talking about Jesus, learning about Jesus. And so, I had all these movies in mind, like Jesus Christ Superstar and Jesus of Nazareth. And this is the Jesus that I always saw everywhere I went. Now let's put those two side by side for just a second here. And so let me ask you, which picture would you have hanging on your wall? I think that there's something about the human condition that from time to time just needs to be reevaluated. Something about the paradigms that we learn through and see through, we need to back up and sort of kind of look at them and take them apart and go, okay, is this really the way that we want to see in our lives? Is this really what we want to know when it comes to God? And so we're going to enter into this series, and I've been talking about this thing that Richard Rohr talks about for 3 years. And so it's the 3 boxes. You might be familiar with this. And it describes the normal Christian life. It describes normal discipleship, normal spiritual formation. And so what you normally have is you have this sense of order. And it'll come on usually early in the Christian life, and you kind of go, okay, I sort of have ordered my life a certain way, and this is how God wants me to be. And so this is the way my church has taught me to be. And so you have this sense of order. And there is a sense of security in that. It feels really good. But inevitably, whether we want to or not, we start to enter into the second box that Richard Rohr talks about, and he calls that disorder. So imagine 3 moving boxes. The 2 on the outside look really good. They're all together. The one in the middle is just ripped to shreds. It's ripped apart. It's got water damage. If you've had movers like I've had in the past, it's one of those boxes. And that's disorder, where we don't feel as certain. We don't feel as safe. We don't feel as sure that we used to feel. And that's a really challenging place to be. And sometimes that span of disorder will last a really long time. Sometimes it's short, but sometimes it's longer. Sometimes it's really hard to be in that middle box and be in the church, the local church. I don't know if you know this, but local churches were designed for the early parts of the Christian journey, generally. They're designed to reach out and introduce people to Jesus. Huge. Love it. Want it to happen all the time. They're designed to help you discover your spiritual gifts. They're designed to give you a job. The church will always give you a job. They're designed to help you come and sit in a worship gathering like this. Generally, churches and the ministry of churches, at least in the 20th century, really maybe from the Enlightenment on, haven't been designed, and I would say at least in the stream of Christianity that I've been in, they really haven't been designed to deal with the middle box. They haven't, for lots of reasons that we're going to explore in this series. But I believe what God wants in the journey that he takes us on is he wants to take us right through to the third box, and that's called reorder. A reordering of your spiritual life, your God life, your Christian journey. And so order, disorder, reorder, and you go through it again and again and again. Sometimes you go through really fast, 5 times in 1 year. Sometimes you'll go through 1 time in 10 years. I mean, who can predict these things? And so I'm going to give you a definition, and some of this talk today might feel a little heady, and that's okay. Sometimes we have real, humorous or emotional talks or whatever. This one might feel a little heady. That's okay. And if you have the YouVersion app, I've written way too much in there. And so just go ahead and you can look at that later. There's going to be a lot of scripture in there. I'm only going to refer to it. We're not going to read it. So this is for your small groups and for your own study and that sort of thing. But I want to give you a definition of deconstruction. Deconstruction is when we begin to question the presuppositions, assumptions, and foundational doctrines and theology that we were given in the church communities, classrooms, and families we grew up or came to faith within, and therefore dismantle the parts of faith that need to be rebuilt. One of my favorite scholars, as you know, is N.T. Wright, a brilliant New Testament scholar. 500 years from now, people are going to be reading N.T. Wright going, wow, those people didn't know what they had. And so if you've read any N.T. Wright, then you're familiar with this. Here's how he talks about it. He prefers the word dismantling. He describes his own deconstruction process as the dismantling of some of the superstructures I was given as a child because I realized this doesn't quite make sense. And at the end of the talk, I'll finish that quote. I think it's really, really helpful. Now, the best kind of deconstruction, and if you don't know this, deconstruction has become a very bad word, especially in more fundamentalist type settings, and we'll get to that as well. But the best kind of deconstruction is when you dismantle things that aren't right, they're not working, they're not true, or whatever it might be, and you work all the way through to the other side, and we call that reconstruction. And so reconstruction essentially happens when our faith is pulled apart and some of the things that we no longer agree with or find helpful or that were just plain wrong are left behind for a newly formed faith, one that is stronger, more biblically and historically rooted, and ultimately, and this is what I want you to experience, more beautiful. More beautiful. This is part of what we talk about when we talk about filling the world with God's beauty. If we are not thriving in our spiritual journeys and bravely entering into this process that I've been describing, it'll be really difficult to fill the world with God's beauty. And so this term, if you took a philosophy class in college, or maybe you just like to read philosophy or whatever, it's been co-opted. And it's been co-opted by people that have been leaving the more fundamentalist / evangelical, not all of them, but some of those types of churches. And it's been co-opted, and it means something a little bit different than Derrida meant back when he wrote about this. French philosopher who talked about deconstruction. And there's this scholar named Jared Bias who writes about this and teaches about this. And he's come out of that setting, that very kind of more strict setting, and has sort of processed out of that and reflected back on it. And so one of the things that he writes, and I don't have this up here, but it's in the notes. He uses this illustration of like popping popcorn. And so he says, it's a misconception that deconstruction is anything goes relativism. Because if you haven't been in this world where people are talking about this, that's one of the things that people say. Oh, it's just truth is relative, and they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and this is just a cool thing that millennials do, and it's wrong, we shouldn't be doing this. It's not true, actually. It's a misconception. And so he says it's a misconception that deconstruction is anything goes relativism. According to Derrida, deconstruction suggests that there's always more meaning to something than just one thing. This is not nihilism. In fact, he says it's the opposite. He says it's like when you put too many popcorn kernels in a pan. You guys ever do this? Like the old days, on the stove and you're shaking it and that sort of thing. He says some forms of Christianity, like fundamentalism, try to hold that lid down, but the pressure keeps popping the lid off and popcorn spills over. And he says it's not that there's no popcorn, it's just that once it starts popping, there's too much to be contained by the pan. Now stay with me. Here's what he says. He says the pan is our systematic theology. If you don't know what systematic theology is, it means putting everything in categories and having it nicely, like a nice little bow on the end. I like systematic theology, but it has its limits. And he says the pan is like our systematic theology. The pan is our limited understanding of God, and unless you see God face to face, Paul says, I see in a mirror dimly. It's like a foggy mirror. One day we will see face to face, but right now we sort of look dimly. We can't quite perceive everything. So we haven't arrived. The pan is our limited understanding of God. He says the popcorn is the truth. Deconstruction doesn't tell us there's no truth. it says that there's always more truth than people in power want you to believe. There's more discovery. There's more richness. There's more beauty. What would it be like for you to discover more of God? What would it be like in your life? Like you're just on this journey and you're like, oh man, I've read that 1,000 times and now it just hit me in the face. I didn't see that in the scriptures, or I didn't see that in my life, or I didn't see that in my community. I didn't see what God was doing in my own world, in my own oikos. Remember, oikos, your extended household. These are the peeps in your life that God has called you to love unconditionally, to pray for them, to invest in them, to invite them. What is God doing in your world? There are a lot of reasons why people start to enter into this whole deconstruction, reconstruction process. Let me just give you 3 categories. And you can kind of wrestle with these and unpack these. There's probably a lot more, but let me give you 3. One is people enter into this process because they are exposed to more accurate information. They're exposed to more accurate information. Is that slide up there? Go ahead and put that up there, Will, that next slide. There you go. Sometimes we have information that it's not all good. It might be 90% good, or it might be like 2% good. And so as you do your journey and you're hungry for information and you're hungry to learn, sometimes we realize, oh, I didn't have it quite accurate. I mean, this happens all over the scriptures. You know, people sort of have a view of God and then they get corrected. And so sometimes we deconstruct because of that. Sometimes it's because we face a crisis. Something happens, the bottom falls out. This is Job, right? Like he had a whole different understanding of God at the end of Job than he did at the beginning of Job. It had nothing to do with his character. It had to do with he had to go through this crisis. He was in that disordering phase for a long time. And sometimes we go into this deconstruction process because of the beliefs and behaviors of other Christians, especially leaders. Because we look at how leaders behave, and we look at some leaders in some parts of churches, and we've come across those leaders that kind of push everybody down, or they're narcissistic, or they're very dogmatic to the point where if you disagree with a thought leader in your church, then you are out. You're on the other side. Oh yeah, we love everybody and we accept everybody, but if you disagree, then you might as well find another church. Guys, one of the reasons I came to Saratoga Federated Church is because it's a place where people are willing to live with a certain amount of tension in their life. We do not all have to agree about every little thing in the Christian life. There are so fewer essentials than I thought there were when I was in my 20s. And I think the more that we grow and the more that we learn, we reflect and we realize the more we don't know. And that there are just maybe a few things that make Orthodox historical Christianity, biblical Christianity, what it is. And so I came here because I actually like living in places of tension. I don't know what it is. I'm weird. You know, I don't mind that uncomfortableness. Now, I don't want to just be uncomfortable 24/7, but you get my point. I want to have a place where people feel safe to explore. And one of the reasons why churches aren't good at spiritual formation, and especially this kind of spiritual formation, is because it's scary. You don't want to be exiled by your tribe, do you? I mean, try being a leader in a church and going through this process. I mean, it'll get you fired really fast in a lot of churches. It'll get you criticized, and I can show you my emails someday. It's really funny over the last 10 to 20 years. Because I don't mind living with a certain amount of tension, but it's not normal for us to want to do that. And so we try to avoid it. And we watch people that are going through this process. We watch people struggling with their faith because inevitably God will pull you into a place where things don't make sense and everything in life isn't certain, and you start to struggle and you start to push back. And then you have some options. When that happens in your life, you have some options. You can keep going through it, or you can run back where it's safe and stop asking the questions. Maybe accept some of the pat answers that you've been given. We've been trained to try to defend and prove everything. But this is such a biblical process to go through. It really is. So you have Abraham, and he's standing over Isaac. And can you imagine? And in that moment, he's going through this deconstruction, and the lights come on, and there's a reconstruction process. There's a beautiful faith on the other side of it. It's Moses in front of the burning bush, and he's not the same Moses that killed the Egyptian, but he's not the same Moses that will part the Red Sea and that will go through the desert with the whining Israelites, but he's there right now, and he's going through this disordering process. I don't want to go back there. I can't talk. Oh, man. And he gets this new glimpse of God and God's power. This is Jacob, right? He wrestles with God in Genesis 32. And he comes out the other side, and guess what he gets? He gets an injury for the rest of his life. When you go through this process, if you will go through it, there will be a sense of scarring and injury that will benefit you and will benefit others. Jacob gets a new name. It's a beautiful name. One who contends with God and yet goes on and yet survives and yet proceeds forward. This is Job big time, right? It's all over the Psalms. Nicodemus is deconstructing in the middle of the night. He doesn't want to go through this in public. He's going to get kicked out of the synagogue. He's a Pharisee. Are you kidding me? He's got to hide his whole deconstruction process. We're going to refer to it in a minute, but in Acts chapter 10, this is Peter on the roof of Simon the tanner's house in Joppa, and then when he goes to see Cornelius, completely deconstructs and reconstructs into something beautiful. This is Jesus in Matthew 5 when he keeps saying, "You have heard that it has been said." You have a theology, you have a perspective, but I say, upside down, counterintuitive, antithetical way of Jesus. But for some, especially those that are in some streams of Christianity, deconstruction has become the new common enemy. If you study church history, especially in our country, the more fundamentalist evangelical churches always have a common enemy. And it keeps changing. It keeps changing over and over again. Deconstruction is one of them. Recently, a famous, I won't tell you these names, but there's a famous Christian rock singer who in one of his concerts screamed to all the kids at the concert. He says, "It is time that we declare war against this deconstruction Christian movement." He says there's nothing Christian about it. It is a false religion. I would contend that he absolutely is wrong and misunderstands the biblical, normal, Christian process of growth. There's a famous pastor, mega pastor, author, you would know who it is, in Texas, after preaching a sermon in which he equated deconstruction with leaving the faith. He clarified that deconstruction doesn't mean doubt or theological wrestling or struggling through church hurt. And I would say, unfortunately, he's wrong. It actually exactly means those things. He also contends that if you ever experience the grace, like truly experience the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ, actually, that's really impossible to deconstruct from. Again, I would contend that he's wrong. I don't know anybody, and I've known a lot of people over the years that have gone through this process. I've known people that have come through to the other side. I've known people that have deconstructed and just stayed there, sadly. So I said earlier, you got different choices. You can run back and be really busy and believe the things, and just keep on believing the things that don't, that you don't really buy into. Or you can just be miserable. And you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's what we don't want. We don't want to just chuck the faith. We don't want to chuck God's bride, the church. No, we want to engage in hard but beautiful ways. I would say I don't know anybody that's gone through this process that would say, "Oh yeah, I never really wanted the grace and love of God, his mercy. I experienced it, but I don't really need it anymore. Or maybe I just never really experienced it. I don't know anybody. It's a straw man argument. It doesn't make sense. Nobody's proclaiming that. And so there's tension in this journey, and I'm inviting you into it. Here's the thing. We want to continue to grow. Ephesians 4. We walked through this series in Ephesians a while back last year. In Ephesians 4, it says, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. I haven't reached there yet. I don't know about you. I'm not there. I feel like I got a really long way to go. I'm not there. We're not there. If you're here, if you're watching online, or if you're sort of new to Saratoga Federated, or if this whole concept is new to you, we're sort of like a bunch of messed up, messy people trying to stumble towards Jesus and share Jesus with others. I mean, it's like we're far from perfect. But I think that's a beautiful thing, because we can see God at work in different people's lives. And it is so encouraging. And so, Acts chapter 10, again, you might want to reflect on part of chapter 9, 10, and 11. But there's this story. The church had exploded in Jerusalem. It's about 10,000 people. And nobody wants to leave. Why would you want to leave? Like, things are going good. They're blowing up. It's like church growth 101. Keep it going, man. Come on. And it's just... The whole city is just swelling, but they were commanded to leave. Like, you got to go into all the world, but they don't want to leave. And then this great persecution breaks out, and everybody scatters around the Mediterranean. Only a few, of the leaders are left in Jerusalem. But Peter decides to go out and explore, and so he goes to this town, and he actually does this miracle. God works through him, and the dead person is raised to life. And so he decides to stay there in this little seaside place called Joppa. And one day he goes on the roof and he starts to pray, and he has this weird vision as he's praying. There's this big sheet that is lowered from heaven, and there's all these animals on it. And some of the animals are considered clean animals, which means a Jew could eat those animals. But then some of them are unclean. Those are the ones that the Gentiles could eat, but the Jews could not. And I know that we don't really feel the intensity of that. But we have our categories of clean and unclean as well, don't we? We have our own categories of holy and pure and good and bad and impure and unholy, unclean things. Every culture has those categories. Well, the ancient Jews had those categories. And so then he hears this voice that says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And Peter's like, "Are you kidding me?" Go to the next slide, put that up there. "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And he's like, "No, I'm not going to do that. Are you kidding me?" And then he says, surely not I, Lord. I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." Peter rejects. He says no to God. God's inviting him to do something that seems crazy. It seems out of bounds. In that moment, he's being pulled apart. He's deconstructing his theology right there on the roof by the sea. And if you don't think that's what he was doing, just think about this. Peter grows up with a theology of the scriptures. He believes in the authority of the Bible. And this is the same with Nicodemus and all the others, right? They know the story. They've read it. They've got it memorized. They teach it. They practice midrash, which means they're arguing with one another and they're wrestling. But from the very beginning, God's plan has been there. We look back and we can see it. It's in Genesis 1, 2, and 3. It's clear as day, sort of. And then it just unfolds and unfolds. Was Abraham supposed to be a blessing to all the world? Okay, then get together with those Gentiles, Peter. And it's just all there. And so he's looking back. No, I can't do that. God says, don't call anything that I have created unclean. He's made it clean. This is a new thing. This is a new teaching. This is something that was there, but it hadn't bloomed into his mind yet. And Peter would struggle with this deeply throughout his life. Now he goes to this house and he goes into this Gentile's house and these miracles start taking place and he's like, now I know God doesn't show favoritism. It's like it's a both and we're all here together and the Spirit of God has come to the Gentiles and I need to keep this rolling. And he gets criticized from the church in Jerusalem. They're ready to go, okay, buddy, what are you doing? Because that sort of stuff will not just get you in trouble, but it'll get you arrested, it'll get you beaten, it'll get you killed. Deconstruction and reconstruction, it's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game. But Peter stands up and tells what happens. He gets the blessing. But then later on, he backs away from his own new theology, his own new perspective on what God is doing. And Paul has to oppose him to his face in Galatians chapter 1. I had to oppose Peter to his face because when these certain Jews came from James and Peter was all hanging out with the Gentiles and then they came, he's like, oh, I can't do it anymore. See you, Gentiles. It's scary. This stuff is scary. You're going to get judged for it. People are going to misunderstand you. They're going to think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Don't do that. But it's good. It's good for us. And you will experience incredible satisfaction and growth if you go through this process. We are all capable of getting things wrong. As I always say, about 1/3 of what I teach, and I get this from NT Wright, about 1/3 of, actually he didn't say it, he quoted somebody else, but 1/3 of what I teach is wrong. The only problem is I don't know which 1/3 it is. And so you figure it out. We are all capable of misunderstanding. We are all in need of a certain amount of deconstruction from time to time. Let me ask you a question. How do you need to change? In this regard, how do you need to change? I'm going to give you a couple questions, but before I do, I just want to say this. I want to give you just a little preview of a talk I'm going to give at the beginning of May, because there is an idol within the Christianity that I grew up in. Now, maybe you grew up in a different Christianity, but the one that I grew up in, there is a bit of an idol, and that idol is certainty. I was taught to defend the faith. I was taught to be certain about what I believed. But certainty has never been the goal. I was taught that doubt, you better be careful. Doubting Thomas. He's always like a loser. I want to be doubting Thomas, quite frankly. You see, the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. So if you are walking by faith today, you're not going to be certain. You're going to have doubts. And those doubts are going to be gifts to you. And so I'm going to give you some things. I'm going to give you 2 questions to wrestle with. And in the app, there's a whole list of questions that you can use for your life group. And I think we'll put them online maybe tomorrow or something like that. But let me give you a couple questions. Are there parts to your faith that have been deconstructed or just fallen apart in the past? Share specifics if you feel comfortable. And so if we had like an hour and a half here today, we would do that right here in this room. And I think it would be beautiful, but it would be very uncomfortable for some of you. And so maybe this is a conversation you have with somebody that you trust on the way home. Maybe this is something that you journal at a coffee shop or at the beach. Maybe it's for your life group this week. Question 2 is, in your opinion, what is the biggest reason people are deconstructing from their faith today? If you haven't realized it, I mentioned this on Easter, there's a mass exodus out of this tradition of Christianity. In fact, in American Christianity, it's all denominations, all traditions, mass exodus. Why are people deconstructing and rejecting? They're not the enemy. They're not the bad people. There's something happening in our land, in the times that we live in right now. There's something happening even within the local churches that we inhabit in our city. And I think we have to step back and go, oh, God, help us to see ourselves more clearly. Help me to see me more clearly. Let's start right there. Work in me. And so write those things out. And don't forget to write your questions on those cards. But let me give you 4 encouragements to leave with you today for those of you that find your faith falling apart from time to time. Number one is this: find your people. Find your people, even if that means leaving your church. If your people aren't here and your people are in another church, I will bless your socks off. Find your people. I hope you can find your people here, and I hope people that aren't here will find you to be their people in time. Go through this process in community. One of the worst things that you can do going through the deconstruction, reconstruction process is to isolate yourself. It's really not a good decision. I know that sometimes you feel like you have to do that. Either insecure or embarrassed, or you just don't want the attack or the judgment or whatever. Find your people. Work on finding your people. If you can't find your people, write us a note on that card. Send us an email, and we will come alongside, and we'll do everything we can do to help you find your people. Here's the last part of N.T. Wright's quote. Will, I'm going to skip over the first quote. The last part, so again, he says this deconstruction is the dismantling of some of the superstructures I was given as a child because I realized this doesn't quite make sense. And then he goes on to say that where one goes to find a church to help you do that in America, that's tricky right now. And he's British. He's looking at America from across the pond. He's like, that's really tricky in your country right now to find a place that's safe and productive to do that. So find your people. We want to be different. We want to be a place where people can be invited to pursue theological discovery. It's one of our 3 core values. Let's do it. Let's do it. Number 2, read widely and read without fear. Read people that you disagree with. Read people from a different country. Read people from a different denomination, different religion. I was taught to be so afraid to read people that didn't agree with me 100%. That is the wrong advice. Stretch yourself. Whenever I recommend a book, if you think that I agree with 100% of that author, then you misunderstand. Never do I agree with 100%. But I want to recommend things that I think will stretch us and help us and make us question and get us puzzled over things. And so in the weeks to come, I'm going to give kind of a short reading list that you might want to read. But read widely and read without fear. Man, I was taught you can't read that. If you read that, you might go down the slippery slope, and that sort of thing. No, don't buy into that. All those fallacies. Number 3, remind yourself that this is normal and even good. And so, Saratoga Federated Church, would you please remind one another of that? Over the next 6 weeks, encourage one another as long as it's called today. Why? So that you will not fall to the deceitfulness of sin. Hebrews 3. We don't want to be deceived. We want to enter in this encouraging one another. Last one. Read the scripture, watching for stories and moments of faith falling apart and being built up again. You will be surprised what you find and how encouraging it is. And so, my brothers and sisters, let's enter into this journey together and see what God has for us over the next 6 weeks. We haven't been given a spirit of fear last time I read the scriptures, right? No. So let's walk into this in community together, in loving one another, and see what God has for us in our own journeys and our collective journey. Would you pray with me? God, thanks so much for my friends here today. May our hearts be open. God, may your spirit be heavy on us. May you have freedom in each of our hearts to do what only you can do, to draw us towards yourself. So God, I pray that Saratoga Federated Church would be a place where we could live in the tension and where we can wrestle with the hard things and the questions, and we don't always have to disagree, but it comes back to you, Jesus. Ultimately, it comes back to you. And I pray today for those that are struggling with you or have walked away from you or don't know you. God, I pray that you would impact each one in a way that each one understands. That each person could open their heart to you in a new and fresh way. Maybe for the first time, maybe for the first time in a long time. Because you love us and you're offering forever life in you. And we pray this in your name. Amen.